This was a very interesting discussion about safety element out of context. We talked about 3 phases. Pre-development phases, then you have development phase where you have mentioned some of the best practices, and finally when it's developed and assessed, you talked about the assessment phase, of course. The final part, which is the most critical, is integrating in an actual context, and it's important to validate the assumptions that was made in the beginning within your context where you will be deploying the SEooC.
Yes.
Welcome to another episode of Matrickz Tech Talk. Today we have an unusual setting. We have a Matricksian, Praveen Suvarna, who leads the AUTOSar and embedded development team at Matrickz. Praveen, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your passion, your background?
Thank you so much, Hasan. To introduce myself, my name is Praveen Suvarna. So currently I am responsible for embedded development and AUTOSar department here at Matrickz. I am a Intax certified ASPICE provisional assessor, and I'm also a certified Scrum product owner trained by the co-founder of Scrum himself. I have worked for 3 German OEMs in different projects which are related to ISO 26262, AUTOSar and ASPICE, and I have successfully defended multiple ASPICE assessments, FUSA audits and function safety assessments in my previous experience. So today in this talk, we are mostly going to talk about the software SEooC and how its function safety life cycle looks like.
Thank you, Praveen. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic in functional safety. Safety element out of context. So safety element out of context is something that we hear pretty often in functional safety. Your stack or your certain part of the component is coming from a third-party vendor and it's qualified to ASIL A, B, C, and D, and so on. So Praveen is going to tell you more about safety element out of context, especially in the software context. We're going to narrow it down to software safety element out of context. Praveen, can you first of all tell us the definition of a safety element out of context and then narrow it down to software safety element out of context?
Safety element out of context is a generic element which is not developed considering a particular item, which we call it as a system, and not in the context of a particular vehicle. So here a safety element out of context can be anything. It can be hardware, it can be a ECU or a microcontroller, or it can even be a system. But today in the context of this talk, we are going to mostly talk about the software safety element out of context. So to give an example, it could be as simple as a software component like a crypto service manager in AUTOSar. So there you have the requirements coming from the AUTOSar, which are functional requirements. On the other hand, since we do not know that in which ECU it's going to be implemented or in which system this is going to be integrated, we have to assume the higher level technical safety requirements. So that's where I call it as a generic element during the time of the development.
I understand the software safety element out of context is something like a crypto service manager, the component that is not developed within the context of the vehicle development. Why is it necessary that your software safety element out of context should be qualified, and is qualification enough?
Qualification is one of the phases of software safety element out of context, or what we call in a short term SEooC. So qualification is normally comes as a part of the tier 1 or the system integrator, whoever is using it. But if I'm a developer of a software SEooC, then normally qualification is kind of out of scope for me. And also maybe when it comes to the phase of qualification, we can talk in detail. So just to give a bit more information on this is that, okay, whenever I'm a system integrator and I'm using already developed SEooC, which is already developed and assessed according to ISO 26262, then there are certain things I have to take care of to see that, okay, whatever the assumptions made, during the development, is it matching with my intended environment or not? So this is where the qualification comes into the picture.
So what are the phases of software safety element out of context development? What are the right way to do this? And if you want to qualify the software component from entity like TÜV, what is the right path to follow, and what are the typical mistakes that we do?
Broadly, we can categorize the functional safety lifecycle of a software SEooC into 4 groups. The first one is a technical safety concept phase. The second one is the development phase, and the third one is the typical functional safety assessment phase, and the fourth, which we already talked, is about the qualification phase. So in the first phase of the technical safety requirement, this is a very, very important phase because this is where all the assumptions related to a software SEooC is being made. It could be related to the functional safety, or it could be related to the functionality of the software SEooC, or it could also be related to the environment in which our SEooC will operate. So in this phase, normally what happens is there will be assumptions made on the technical safety requirements in the system level, and from these technical safety requirement, we will derive the software safety requirements, which will be used for the development of SEooC. So there is normally a way in the functional safety, if at all we want to assign an SE level to a particular requirement. It could be in a vehicle level or in a system level. We normally do a HARA, but it is a bit different compared to SEooC, wherein we do not do any HARA. Rather, we once again assume the SE level. That, okay, this is what the intended environment is. This is being developed to operate in an ECU, which might be having SLB as an overall SE level, or SLC or SLD. So this kind of assumption we will make in this phase. So here, according to the experience what we had in the previous projects, the best practice here is to always do this technical safety concept phase before we start with the development phase, because normally we see that customers neglect this phase, and as soon as they have the functionalities, for example, even if you talk about the crypto service manager, okay, the functionalities or the requirements are coming from the AUTOSAR, and there could be some requirements coming from the stakeholders or OEMs with which you are regularly working. So they will start with the development. But later in the development phase, whenever they want to go for an assessment, if you have not done the technical safety concept phase already, or there has not been a proper assumptions made already, then you will be in a trouble. Or it could be situations like sometimes developer want to sell it to the integrator, but the system is a safety critical system, but you haven't considered this or you haven't made these kind of assumptions already. So then you have to come back and you have to reinitiate the change request process according to the ISO 26262. So the best practice is to always do the technical concept phase, define the assumptions related to the safety, related to the functionality, related to the external interfaces, related to the operating environment, then start with the development phase.
So technical safety concept is really the foundation you're saying. Can you talk a little bit about technical safety concept?
Yes. So the technical safety concept in the scope of a software SEooC is mostly based on the assumptions, because whenever if I'm a developer of a software SEooC, then I don't know in which system it is going to be integrated. So I have to make certain assumptions related to the technical safety requirements, or even for the safety goal of the vehicle itself. And based on that, I have to derive the software requirements. So these will serve as an input for my further development activities.
Now that you have explained us what to do, what is absolutely necessary before you start the development, let's talk a little bit about the development phase. What should you do in the development phase? What is the difference between a regular, Scrum-based development and a development environment where you are creating a safety element out of context?
Okay, the development phase of the software SEooC will take place according to ISO 26262 Part 6. In a sense, ASPICE or any quality standard is the base for this development activity, and it will go along with the V cycle. It is like you start with the software requirement, then you design the software architecture. which will be further derived down to the unit design and the coding. And on the right side, we will perform the unit integration and the qualification testing. So everything we do in a normal ASPICE project up to a QM element has to be followed when it comes to the development of SEooC. On top of that, for example, in the assumption phase or the first phase, which is a technical safety concept phase, if at all we have made some assumption that, okay, this software SEooC will be operating in an environment where the other software components are of SLB or a SLC, then the functional safety will come into picture. So there are certain verification and validation methods and the guidelines defined by ISO 26262, which has to be followed along with the normal ASPICE lifecycle for the development of a SEooC.
Tell us a little bit about what are the best practices. Do you have any tips and suggestions for the audience?
Development phase, according to me, is more depending on the safety culture of the organization. So normally whenever we conduct or whenever we execute a function safety related project, irrespective of it, any software development project which is related to the function safety, where we start is these artifacts related to the function safety. This is the first point. It could be your safety plan. It could be your FMEA related to the software, which is derived from the system FMEA. It could be your software verification plan, or it could be preparing towards the safety case, or in the case of software SEooC, preparation of the safety manual, which will be an input for the system integrator. So this has to be considered during the start of the project. Normally, we have also seen in the past experience that some of the organization or the projects do not worry much about the functional safety aspect. Rather, they will follow the typical V model based development according to the ASPICE. But in a later point of time, once again, there will be a bit of a mismatch between what is the expectation of ISO 26262 and what we are achieving with the ASPICE. So this is very, very important that we take functional safety activities hand in hand with our other development activities according to the ASPICE. So that is the most important one, and I would think that this is the best practice that everyone has to follow in the development phase.
Fascinating. You talked about what to do before development, what to do during development. Now let's come to the assessment. Mm-hmm. Can you tell our audience, because you have defended many such safety assessments, safety qualification, safety audits. Mm-hmm. Can you share your experience with the audience and tell a little bit about what to do for this assessment, and what is the expectation of the assessor or the auditor in such cases?
Okay. Normally we talk about the confirmation measures as defined in the ISO 26262. It could be confirmation reviews, it could be functional safety audit, or it could be functional safety assessment. Even though we identify this phase separately compared to the development phase, I think this also has to go in parallel to the development phase. For example, if you are anyways already developing a software SEooC according to ASPICE, why don't you do a FUSA audit during the development so that you already identify the weakness of your process? You already get to know if your process is sufficient enough to achieve the function safety needed for the software SEooC. This is one of the good practice. Or even when it comes to the functional safety assessment, mostly functional safety managers or the engineers or the experts who work in this domain sometimes think that, okay, this is the last part of my development lifecycle assessment, which is usually not the case. Because in the past experience, what we did was we took this also parallel in the sense you already have a functional safety assessor in the project who will come and do a bit of a gap assessment, or who will do sometimes the offline assessment, so that you will be getting the constant feedback, and also you will know if you are going in a right direction with whatever the assumptions you made or whatever your target is. To sum it up, assessment phase is not something which comes at the end of the development where you start preparing. Rather, you will start preparing for the assessment in the beginning or during the development phase. Why I say that assessment has to go hand in hand with the development, or you have to already plan assessment during the development, is because the artifacts which act as an input to your assessment are being produced during the development phase. It could be safety case, because at the end of the development phase, you have to provide enough evidence to show that whatever the safety requirements you had or the technical safety requirements you had, you are achieving it with respect to the verification on the left-hand side or the validation on the right-hand side. So this has been already prepared during the development phase. And also all the inputs, what we have to give as a provider of SEooC to a system integrator, which is the safety manual, very, very important document when it comes to a software SEooC. This has also been developed during the development phase. So we cannot really separate these two phases. In reality, they should go hand in hand so that there is a good mixture of preparation and then you provide the evidence during the assessment.
So you have the assessment, you're done with the assessment. What comes after assessment?
If I consider myself as a developer of a software SEooC, then assessment is the last phase for me in this life cycle. So what comes after assessment is the qualification. In the sense, if there is a system integrator who wants to use my SEooC in their project, then they have to validate the assumptions I made in their target environment. So this is what I call as a qualification. In the sense, they're qualifying my software SEooC to be used in their project. Because whenever they have a system, it means that there is a context. There is a context, and also they know the context of the vehicle. So this is a phase, or this is a phase where the activities will be normally whatever the inputs, like the safety manual inputs, as a software SEooC developer, which I provide to the system integrator. So they have to validate the assumptions made here to see if this really matches with the target environment. So as we spoke in the previous parts, there could be a case that any of the software SEooC developer has not performed the technical safety concept phase, or any of the software SEooC developer made some assumptions. He performed the technical safety concept, made some assumptions. It may not be matching the final system requirements. So in this case, what we have to do is we have to once again start with the change request management according to the ISO 26262. Based on that, we have to do an impact analysis of the differences regarding the assumptions made in the SEooC and what is the requirement of the target environment. The phase qualification normally belongs to the system integrator. Mm-hmm. So the developer will already develop a software SEooC according to ISO 26262, and also he will assess. So this software SEooC is then provided to a system integrator who will be integrating this SEooC in their system, the target environment. So the main thing what should be done in this phase is the validation of the assumptions made during the development of a software SEooC. So the system integrator has to see whatever the n number of assumptions made during the development, which are already listed in the safety manual document. Can it be validated in my target environment? This is normally happens in the qualification phase. So here also there are certain things to be taken care. For example, if I am a software integrator and for one of my project, which is a safety critical project, I need to purchase a software SEooC, which is being developed by another organization, then normally I will look for a SEooC which is already been developed according to ISO 26262 and also been assessed according to ISO 26262. This will give me a lot of confidence that there is already a ISO 26262 related development lifecycle has been followed and also it's been assessed. This is the point number one. The point number two is I have to always look for a safety manual from the provider of the software SEooC, because this is one of the major input. Whatever the assumptions or whatever the inputs given in the safety manuals has to be validated when I integrate this SEooC in my system or an item from the ISO 26262 terminology. And the third very, very important point is normally during the development of a system, which normally runs sometimes for years, like 2 years or 3 years, it is always possible that there is a multiple releases of the software SEooC. So this is very, very important that every time there is a new version of the software SEooC I receive from the developer of the software SEooC, which I integrate into my system, I have to validate the assumptions again and again. I have to repeat it. It's not like one time I validate, for the next releases I do not. Rather, I have to keep checking the safety manual to see if there are any further or if there are any additional inputs mentioned which I should take care of as a system integrator. So this is something as a system integrator I have to take care.
Fascinating. So, I mean, to sum it up, we talked about 3 phases. Pre-development phases, where you really emphasize on the term technical safety concept. Then you have development phase, where you have mentioned some of the best practices. And finally, when it's developed and assessed, you talked about the assessment phase, of course. The final part, which is the most critical, is integrating in an actual context. And it's important to validate the assumptions that was made in the beginning within your context where you will be deploying the SEooC.
Yes.
This was a very interesting discussion about safety element out of context. If you have any question or comments about safety element out of context, please feel free to write in the comment section. We'll try to answer your question as much as possible. If you have liked it, if you have got value from this episode, please click the like button and share this video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.